Well, good morning to all of our many fans. We are here at the end of the week, and the spring is beginning to spring. Is that right, Patty? Is your spring beginning to spring?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Dr. Collins. I was actually away in Spain there for a week and I'm just back.
Oh,
Got
get
back last
you.
night.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, I left yesterday, Jude. I about left Spain about, I think, about 1 o'clock. It was
yeah.
about 26, 27 degrees. The sun was splitting
Oh,
the rocks.
wow.
And I arrived back in Donegal and the sun was splitting nothing. So there you go.
But the
The
temperatures.
only thing it was, no, in fairness, it wasn't cold yesterday.
That's the main thing. So, well, I prefer that grey sky to go away too, but at least there's some sign of spring. The thing is, the trees are full. The blossoms have been blown off them, replaced by
Yeah,
leaves, and we're still
yeah,
not into spring, and weather-wise,
exactly.
which is,
Dr. Collins, before we start, and just before, quite literally about 2 minutes ago, before we came on
yeah.
air, I just noticed, according to social media, anyway, Tesco's have recorded a 2.8 billion profit. Right, Jude, when you think about it, the reason I'm throwing this at you, has there been a cost of living crisis? Come, it seems to me that every big company, particularly the supermarkets, are recording massive profits. Then look at Amazon, look at Intel, look at whatever else you want to name them. All these big companies, Zuckerberg's Facebook and all that, and recording billions and billions, and yet there seems to be this massive disconnect where people at the lower end of the scale, like if Tesco's 2.8 billion, Jude. It's a company that supplies a hell of a lot of people with their basic foodstuffs.
Well, maybe that's the point, Pat, is that what you're getting there is a small margin. In other words, we're not being gouged for the price of groceries. It's just that they've got so many stores. If they can get a little bit of profit in each store, they're going to have huge profit. And presumably, there's a fair number of stakeholders that have to pay off or give a dividend to or whatever.
Well, I presume after all their stakeholders and all the rest of it and their staff. But Jude, if you think 2.8 billion, that's almost 3 billion. That's
Uh,
3,000 million pound profit for a supermarket. There's someone strikes me as odd. If we're supposed to come through one of the worst cost of living crisis, where ordinary people are really, really struggling, Jude. People are deciding which bill do we pay this month. The cost. My dear Mrs. For the last day in fact, last night when we arrived, we had occasion to go stop off to buy something to eat, a fish and chips or something for two, but 22 quid. Do you remember a time you could have got two fish and chips for about 5 or 6 quid? No,
uh,
okay. And by the way, that's not. I'm not talking 40 years ago. I'm talking about
yeah.
5, 7 years ago.
Yeah, yeah. Well, certainly it's the case that the pandemic, the lockdown, all sorts of things favored the rich hugely. I mean, the multi-billionaires like Apple and Microsoft and so on, they made huge profits. Now, I'm not sure why
Yeah.
or how that was, but they made them. So the rich jumped in terms of their incomes enormously. Whereas most people, as you say, or a lot of people are struggling to get by. I was talking to some people about the whole thing about the way we organize our state. Everybody organizes their state in the Western world. And really, there's some basic things that need to be addressed. The degree to which some people can have money and the degree to which some people can have nothing and be sleeping on the street is ridiculous. How can we call ourselves civilized? It doesn't make
Ah,
sense.
the
We
reason.
should, I'd be in favor of a
Go ahead.
dictator coming in and spreading the money more evenly. And I'd be prepared to do
Yeah.
my share if that was necessary.
No, I heard a guy on this morning. He's a very decent fella on Highland Radio, and he was asked by the presenter of the program, did he believe this whole thing about immigration? He says no. He says I think it's a choice. He says I think a lot of young people are heading off to foreign climes for adventure and all the rest. And I was thinking that is so not true. Do you know why a lot of young people simply look in Ireland, north and south, well, but I'm referring specifically to the south. They know they can't afford to buy a house. The cost of living has got so high. The waiting lists in hospital. I keep saying this. There's two Irelands. The one where those at the no, we'll call them a Fine Gael supporters. They get
Mm.
23% of the vote. The people who vote for them think everything's great. because maybe they got their private insurance, they already own their house. They're probably the older section of society. But if you're 24, 25 and got a job as a nurse or a school teacher or whatever, and you look at the price of housing and you're saying, wait a minute, before I even start, I'd be paying 14 to 1600, and that's and maybe rural parts of Ireland and Dublin would be 2,200 if I went to rent a house. Where's your prospects there?
It's absurd. But I want to add, Pat, that it is true. Well, I agree with you that people are forced into emigration because they just can't make ends meet, and they get so much better money, particularly people who are in the health service. And that's in the north as well as the south.
Yeah.
They get far, far better money in Australia or in Canada or other places like that. But at the same time, it is true, I think, that young people quite like the idea of going somewhere else. I know when I was there,
I'm not disputing that.
I went for financial reasons, but also the thrill of going, you know.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. I accept that totally. But to claim that I think it's a terrible misreading. I know a lot of people have just simply saying, "Look, I can't see a future here," and leave. My dear Mrs. A couple of years back, we had a sort of fault in electricity, and we got this young fella down from Letterkenny to repair it. And it's very good and all the rest. And the way someone else happened about 2 years later, and she went looking for him. He had emigrated to Australia. Now, maybe in his case, it could have been choice or it could have been necessity. I don't know. But in fairness, I think it probably was choice in this case. But the number of young people who have disappeared from this place is phenomenal.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, Mary Lou McDonald was in Australia talking to people, young people, among others, and saying to them, well, we hope you enjoy your time in this wonderful country, etc. But we do want you to come back.
You bet.
I thought that was very sensible. I mean, she was doing it for her own ends, but still made a lot of sense. Okay, listen, Pat, let's get on to the official agenda here. If I use the phrase, a little sunshine at sunset, you'll know that I'm talking about Harold Wilson. Do you want to explain to the huddled masses what I mean by a little sunshine at sunset for Harold?
Harold Wilson was probably the dominant politician of his era. In the late 60s, early 70s, remember Harold Macmillan, you've never had it so good. You know, that old Tory after the Second World War, you know, lions led by lambs during the war and all this. And the Brits suddenly, the Labour came along. Harold Wilson struck a chord that the hypocrisy of old Britain. And Harold Wilson was the man that probably, what would you say that word, Jude, the zeitgeist. Suddenly the Beatles came along, Liverpool Football Club came along, Manchester, everything was suddenly, the whole pop and probably encapsulated most was Harold Wilson. But Harold was a sort of a pipe smoking, you know, whatever and so on. But what little did people realize behind that, he was a sex machine, to quote James Brown.
No, easy on, Pat, easy on. He's not a sex machine.
But hold on, let's get this clear. Here was this guy, you know, and the old conservative, almost with a small c, by the way, and you know, smoking his pipe, and the Prime Minister. And he was, first of all, he had an affair with Marcia Williams, if I remember her name. She was one of his advisors and so on. But anyway, he then had an affair with this girl called Janet, was it?
Hewlett Davies. Hewlett Davies.
Hewlett Davies. She was apparently about 25 years younger than him. She was the deputy press secretary. But what I found amazing, Jude, by 1970, 1980, the Sun and the Mirror were selling 3 and 4 million copies. You know, somebody could hardly break one, and you know, that wasn't on the front page. So how did Harold Wilson keep secret the fact that he had 2 major affairs? Now, by the way, I think it might have been Private Eye or someone had a cartoon of Harold Wilson in bed with Marcia Williams, and he sued and he won, even though that was totally dishonest because he was did have an affair with her. But you know, back then, the leakage in politics was unbelievable. That the fact that he went to his grave and the wee girl went to her grave while she was in her 80s, I think, when she died, without anybody ever finding out, is amazing. Joe Haynes was
press secretary.
Was the guy he was press secretary, very powerful man, like the Alistair Campbell of his day. Yeah. And he said he didn't want to go to his grave without leaving a true record of what happened. So anyway, back in the morals of the 1960s, it wasn't that moral at all.
Well, I have mixed feelings. I mean, I find it amusing. I find it particularly amusing that Harold Wilson retired at 76, and the reason he gave for retiring was he was exhausted.
He probably will.
Which, from what you say, it seems very reasonable. But that's to take it in the light way. On the other hand, you might ask yourself this. The media are supposed to, as I see it, supply people with information that's of relevance and importance to them. What relevance or importance to the public, British public, was the fact that he was sleeping with Janet Hewlett-Davies or anybody else? What possible difference did that make? Are we saying that sleeping with her was distracting him from his work? Are we saying, I was joking when I said, are we saying that he was exhausted and hadn't time to devote himself to his duties? I mean, I just don't see it as anything but titillation of the public taste for a wee bit of voyeurism, really.
I'm not sure myself, but I'll run someone by. Apparently, remember Ray McNally, the famous Donegal-born actor, starred.
Oh, yeah,
about
yes.
it was about the Labour Prime Minister. Apparently, Harold Wilson was absolutely paranoid about the security services that they were working against him. Now, I presume maybe he was scared when he was having an affair that the next thing photographs would appear in the news of the world of our Prime Minister in bed with his secretary or someone and all that sort of stuff. There could have been an element of that. But there's also that thing too, Jude. Remember, you know it as well. That back in the 60s and 70s, having a child outside of marriage was considered unbelievable.
Mm-hmm.
Having an affair, divorce. Remember Perfumo and all that sort of stuff. So there was a sort of morality, sort of hypocrisy, and so on. So maybe the whole thing about it was here was this man, the paragon of sort of middle class Britain, and all the rest of it, but secretly he was having affairs. Now, that's about as much as I can throw out because I do take your point. I don't see what, in the great scheme of things, who gives a monkeys what he was having, who Harold Wilson was having an affair with.
Yeah, you see, if Harold Wilson had been a conservative and had been preaching family values, which he wasn't and didn't, then I would say, reveal the fact that he's got a mistress, because that throws a light on hypocrisy. But in fact, he didn't. He just was a sort of a uncle type figure smoking his pipe.
See, that was what you could have threw that at John Major. John Major was back to family values, and he was having it off with Edwina Curry. Curry and chips.
As you know, before we come on, I was confused and thought maybe Harold Wilson was having it off with Edwina Curry. But
your point, Harold Wilson was not preaching family values.
No, that's right.
Major was. Yeah.
So I just think that's worth thinking about. Although at the same time, to be honest with you, I find it quite sort of interesting to think of Harold with this woman 25 years younger than him or whatever. Okay, more serious stuff, or maybe you might say more foolish stuff still. Let's talk about Simon Harris. Now, Simon is being regarded as a new kid on the block in Brussels because he visited them, not for the first time, actually. As health minister, apparently, he was there several times. So he wasn't totally unknown. But he had a chat with Ursula von der Leyen, which lasted a whole half hour. And in it, he pointed out that what he called Ireland, the south of Ireland, was going to recognise Palestine and other matters. What's your response to that, Pat? Was that an important visit? Does it matter that he met with von der Leyen or not?
Yeah, Jude, the funny thing, and I was thinking about when I was sitting on my holidays having a glass of red wine. But anyway, Ireland has a strange soft power, Jude. And I think a lot of people, I remember years ago talking to this sort of British journalist type thing guy, and he says, Ireland has influence that's way beyond its size. And there's a certain element of truth in that. Nobody else in America gets a full day like Irish do on St. Patrick's Day. The most powerful man in the world, the Chinese and all the rest sort of look for photo opportunities with the president of America and all that and so on because it's status for them on the world stage and all that sort of stuff. And Ireland gets it. So what I'm going around the house here is the thing about Simon Harris goes out, von der Leyen, Ireland, I read somewhere the last day that they said Ireland leading from the front on the Gaza conflict has allowed or created space for other countries to come in behind Ireland, notably Poland and Spain and Luxembourg and what's the other one, I can't remember. But bottom line, until Ireland criticised Israel, no one else stepped out of line. you know, and Ireland was the first, and I'm very proud, and I'm giving credit to Varadkar and Michael Martin for that. And it's not too often I give them credit, but I do for that. And
Well,
Harris seems to have followed on.
well, I do remember, all right, Varadkar was one of the very first who spoke out and said that well, Joe Biden too, to be fair to him, said, don't make the mistake that we made and go after revenge. But of course, Israel did make the mistake, if they see it as a mistake, and went after revenge, and we've seen the consequences of that. But I have to confess at the same time, Pat, okay, I take your point about the soft power, but thoughts came to mind of the Skibbereen Eagle.
Yeah.
There's Simon Harris telling Ursula von der Leyen, now I'm telling you that we're going to recognize Palestine.
Yeah, hold on. Yeah, but I do take a point, and I'm conscious of it when I'm speaking.
Mm.
But I did. Ireland has a seat on the Security Council.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Ireland's got serious friends.
Mm.
Ireland's got more influence in America than about 90% or 80, or maybe even
Fair enough.
95% of other countries. We've got friends in high places. A lot of Irish politicians get indoors. The old famous one about Hume, that he could get on the front door of the White House while other had to go around the back.
But
There's
Pat,
a lot to be said for that.
Pat, you're talking about the states. We're talking about
Yeah,
the EU. This is the EU
yeah.
that
But no, but I'm using that as an illustration.
okay.
Ireland is quite, and the Brits. A lot of I remember chatting to another guy who was a sort of junior politician. Said Ireland would need, or sorry, Britain would need Ireland, a friend at court in the EU, and they thought Ireland, this is prior to Brexit or roundabout Brexit. So, like, I'm not
Yes.
so sure how that's going to work out now. But anyway, what I know is the Ireland is English speaking. It's pro-Western and so on, and it gives us a certain. But hey, get back to the thing, right? So there's something about Harris. Maybe he'll grow into it, but he doesn't look the part from me. He looks gauche. He's got that high pitched voice. He doesn't have that gravitas. He looks like somebody's always, like the head boy at school, that it hasn't quite grown into the job, if you know what I mean.
A sister of mine said she watched him and she thought of a sixth former. He's like
Yeah,
a sort of bright sixth former who can really got the gift of the gab, be terrific at debating and so on. But
yeah,
you wonder where the substance is. Well, let's hope that he's better than he looks. He has one big plus, according to the paper, the Irish Times today, and that is that he's got Phil Hogan in his corner. Phil
yeah.
Hogan hasn't gone away.
No, no, gone away, no. Big Phil.
Oh, he's
He was the guy,
lurking.
remember the water charges. Big Phil was the minister for local government, and he took one for the team in that one when they tried to introduce water charges. And his payoff from Kenny was to give him the commissioner's job in Europe. And then, of course, he got caught up in that whole thing, the golfing scandal during COVID, and had
Yeah.
to resign as commissioner. But the thing about Big Phil apparently is one hell of a good political operator, and is very, very, very well got in Europe, and
Oh,
apparently knows where the bodies are buried and all the right people to talk to and all that sort of stuff. So maybe Harris has got a serious heavyweight working with him. So fair enough.
yeah. Oh, yeah. I would say that Hogan has made more. You're talking about making friends at court. I'd say he didn't waste his time when he was in Europe, and he was well thought of during that time, rightly or wrongly,
Yeah,
when he was in Europe
yeah,
before Golfgate. But I would suspect, yes, that he has maintained all those contacts, and I would suspect that yes, he probably is a help for
yeah,
Harris. I would be like you though. I was going to say at my best, I'd be suspending my judgment on him, on Harris.
yeah.
At my worst, I'd be saying he's a lightweight, and what's more, he won't last. This is the thing. Don't forget, there's a lot of Fine Gael guys who are retiring, not running next time around. They've
Yeah.
lost their big man, or he's walked out, Leo Varadkar. You've got this young guy in, and he's trying to say, well, this is new energy.
Yeah, that
The
bollocks. Yeah.
signs are not good. The signs are not
Yeah.
good.
Yeah,
Fine
but
Gael are,
Dr. Collins, you keep saying that, but here I keep saying this. No matter what way you come at it, it's more than likely Fine Gael, Fianna Fáil, and the Greens on current polling with Sinn Féin up and down a wee bit either way. The Leo Varadkar the last time was totally dishonest in a certain way. He said, seeing that Sinn Féin was a bigger party, we let them to get on with it, and they couldn't do it. They knew they couldn't do it because they corralled each other off. Fine Gael said they would not go into government with Sinn Féin. Fianna Fáil said they would not go into government with Sinn Féin. So therefore, when they added the coalition together, what was it? Sinn Féin could only come up with about, I think, about 28-30%. The other ones came up with 43%. So they were always going to form the government. And
Well,
even this time around, Jude, no matter, well, it could be totally wrong, but Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, and the Greens are more than likely going to end up with more votes and combination than Sinn Féin will and singularity.
well, you may be right, but I was reading an article which was suggesting that both Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are leaking people. And what's more, on the polls, Sinn Féin are down considerably in what they were, although they're still well ahead. But they were saying that those leaked votes are not going from Fine Gael to Fianna Fáil, not going from Fine Gael to Sinn Féin, or same thing with Fianna Fáil votes or popularity. It's leaking to independents. There's going to be a plethora of independents, and if they can work in a coherent fashion, that could.
Jude, you see, there's the big if. They could work in a coherent fashion. Jude, I think it depends. If you watch, sometimes they're a real ragtag bunch. They're going from extreme left to extreme right, from sort of niche politics, about some particular thing, and then they want everything for their own area, and it's not for the national good; it's for their individual good.
Yes.
I remember to stay in power, Charlie Hoy made it one of the most disgraceful. No, I totally agreed with Tony Gregory, the independent. He got massive amount of money for his constituency, and there was real poverty. But there was real poverty in Donegal. There was real poverty in Mayo. There was real poverty in Leitrim. The very fact that one politician that Charlie Hoy needed an independent vote to stay in power, and he gave him everything he wanted. No, Jude, I don't agree. That's what do you call that in America? Parish pump politics, or
but you could also call it real politics, Pat. You also could call it real politics. You also could call it real politic, because I mean, if you put yourself in Tony Gregory's shoes, or some of these independents today, they're rising to prominence because of some local problem, whether it's immigrants or whatever it may be, and they are saying, "Well, I'll stand up for you." Well, I think that's very fair, really. It's unfortunate, of course, because that means they'll only concentrate on that and for their own patch. And they'll be totally bent on survival for themselves and nobody else. You're right. So it's a pity, but it's totally understandable. And it's also totally understandable that people like Charlie Hoy or Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil or the Sinners would make a deal with them in order to keep them on side. It's not a good way. It's not a good way to run I was going to say a country, a state. It's not a good way to run a state, but it's a very understandable way, given the circumstances. See, there's a lot of people in Ireland feel left behind, being ignored as well. Yeah. I watched that Kitty Hannon show. I don't know if you'd watch it on RTE.
I don't normally watch it.
God, you see people in there. The audience they're people who feel really passionate about things that are happening in their area with regard to immigration or with regard to other things, health service, etc. It's quite enlightening. And, it's an odd thing. And this comes back to the thing we said earlier on about money. It's odd that the South should be slurping in money. And yet you've got these people who are desperate and are throwing up independent TDs in the hope that somebody will pay attention to them. It's just...
There was a guy in Donegal years ago, I think his name was Thomas Gildea, if I remember correctly. And he got elected up around that southwest Donegal area because of a television thing. They couldn't get television reception up there. And he actually started saying, look, wait a minute, what are we? It's a good enough point. Are we some sort of third-class citizens, sitting here? We can't. It was MMD TV or something like that. Yeah. He got himself elected. Judy didn't really have policies, as far as I remember. Didn't really make an impact in the Dáil either. But he got elected in that. And, whatever fault the current government has, economically, they are competent. Socially, I have big issues with them.
Maybe they're lucky. Maybe they're lucky rather than confident. But
they're very lucky, Jude. They're very, very lucky.
Okay, well, so we're still keeping on this theme of money. I wonder if what your views on this would be. The Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, found himself defending the state's paying out of £1 million a month. €1 million a month.
Yeah.
For what? For Ukrainian pets. Not Ukrainians, Ukrainian
Yeah.
pets. Now, what's your view on that, Pat? Is that reasonable or is
Yeah,
that
on the
bloody
surface,
ridiculous?
you would on the surface you would say absolutely ridiculous. Good merciful Jesus, a month on pets and so on and so on. But then I read actually what Michael Martin said, and I can understand. He said when the troubles broke out in Ukraine, he had actually been in Kiev, and he says when you see how people are frightened, they were getting on trains like Germany after, and he says a lot of these people were traumatized, and the kids had their wee dogs with them and whatever. And he says they thought, the dogs were bringing them comfort. They were leaving behind their families, their homes, their everything, and they were. And he says we thought this was going to be a short-term thing. Let them bring their dogs or their
Yeah,
cats
yeah,
here,
yeah.
whatever the
You know, they said they shouldn't. But the question is, should the state
nobody
be
said they shouldn't.
spending a
And he
million
said,
euro a month?
I would say, well, so he said, nobody thought that this would go on for 2 years. He said, we thought it would be a short term and the trauma. And he said, well, at the other point, he says, you could hardly turn around and tell them, and no, you have to euthanize your dogs and your cats before you
No, no,
leave and
no,
all
no.
that.
Nobody's
No,
saying
no,
that.
but hold on. That's what they would have had to do if Ireland hadn't taken them.
I
So
take that.
basically, he thought it was a short term thing and so on. And it turned out to be a million a month, which on the surface, and as I'm telling you now, is totally ridiculous. But I
But
can
it,
understand the reasons for it, and I can
uh,
understand the reasonableness of it. And there's a
I
certain amount of humanity there.
yeah, I agree. I agree that you get very attached to pets, and there's a lot to be said for animals compared to people. But at the
Yeah.
same time, they invited them in with the pets. That's fine, but they didn't commit themselves to feeding these animals or attending to these animals at the rate of €1 million a month.
No,
Micheál
and
Martin,
except
and this is the
but
part that
these
wait
people,
a
these
minute, wait
people
a
left
minute,
the
wait a minute,
Ukraine
wait a
for
minute, wait a minute.
okay.
Tarnish, the thing that really gets in my wick is Tarnish to Micheál Martin defended the state on paying this. And he said that it was humanitarian. Well, obviously it wasn't humanitarian, it was
No,
dogitarian.
it's not humanitarian. No, but
And
yeah,
it was
yeah.
compassionate. And he said it's a decent response that reflects the best of what we are as a people. Oh, would you get a grip on yourself, Micheál?
No,
For God's sake, get a grip on yourself.
hold on to Wait, I'm going personal here. Sir, I retired. I was sort of lost for a couple of months. We had this dog called Murphy. And every day at about 2 o'clock, Murphy, I don't know, and he didn't have a watch, obviously. He'd come in and sit down beside me. In other words, he said, time to go for a walk. See, for about 2 years, at about 2 o'clock every day that I was here, me and Murphy go for a walk. See, when that dog died, I broke down in tears as quick as I would have, it was a member of my family. So I know what the Ukrainians say. You're leaving Ukraine, your area has been bombed, your family are in turmoil, there's trauma, and you maybe got 2 or 3 wins, and they've got this dog, it's a couple in their family pet. And Neil Martin said, come on ahead, bring your and he didn't think for a minute that it was going to last. Now these people left with their shirts on their back, and they've no money. Their God, were they going to feed their pets in Ireland? So the Irish government fell. Now, the fact that it looks so ridiculous now that we're paying a million a month does hold us up to ridicule, but there was a point to it.
Yeah, I agree with all you say. I think animals are terrific. Pets are terrific. I think dogs in particular are they're outstanding. Somebody says you should try to be the person that your dog thinks you are. Uh, so I see that side of things, and I remember when we left Canada, we had a cat. And I
Yeah,
couldn't bear to leave it because then you'd be killed inside 3 weeks in the pound. And we took it with us.
yeah.
We said it cost a bloody
Cost you
fortune.
a fortune.
Aye, and we were living
Absolutely.
in Penury, and the cat was living up in Scotland
Uh,
somewhere in quarantine. The life of
yeah,
Riley.
uh,
Anyway, I appreciate that, but I just think it's a bit daft that we therefore
I know,
say,
and
I
you
love
can,
me, love my pet, pay for me, pay
uh,
for my pet, get out of here.
but in other words, it could be held up to ridicule, but there is a serious point to it.
There
And
is, but
by the way, it's hard to justify as well. By the way,
he over-egged
self-importantly.
it. He over-egged it. I think that's what annoyed me. He said decent
Yeah.
response that reflected the best of what we are as a people. Will you go to hell? For God's sake, have a bit of a wit. Okay, let's get on to the big topic. And actually, it's so obvious in a way. It's Dermot Farriter's written, well, as the Irish Times is doing increasingly frequently, he has written about a united Ireland. And he says money shouldn't be the deciding factor, but it shouldn't be ignored either. And he steps back in history and looks at some of the things that were said about it. He says, for example, a guy, Richard Hopkins, a British Treasury controller in 1939, said that funding, financing Northern Ireland involved fudges, dodges, and wangles. And he says T.K. Whitaker, the famous T.K. Whitaker, that was the sort of financial genius that was behind the Southern governments for so long, that he believed that neither North nor South would consider taking what would be a punitive financial step if you were to get unity of Ireland. They also, Ferreter, I think it is, also says that the household disposable income in the South is about 12% higher than that in Northern Ireland. Here's my question, because I did this, I think, for a column in the Andytown News. Padraig Pearse, James Connolly, and the rest get paid the price of their lives for Irish independence. The fact is, are we prepared to pay anything for United Ireland? Are people reasonable? Does it not reflect badly on us that we say, how much is this going to cost? When other guys who founded the state, certainly the southern state, give their lives.
Yeah, Judy, I'm going to repeat myself, but I have said for a very long time, partition didn't work in the north, but it did in the south. The south turned away, and I'm still thinking that's a lot of truth. What is it? Whitaker said that the south, the north, they didn't want to give up the material advantage, and that was one of the problems for unity. In the south, they didn't want to pay for unity, basically. So that's the two things. Jude, here, if you want my honest opinion, I'm believing the German model. Despite the massive costs and unification, Germany considers unification a success story. We are all, the people who live on the island of Ireland are Irish. I don't give a no, not going to say that. Whether you consider yourself British or whatever.
I don't give a shit.
Yeah, I don't give a shit. Right, exactly. Look, Jude, if you're born in France, you're French. If you're born in Britain, you're British. If you're born on the island of Ireland, simple, you're Irish. And the people who live on this island should be unified. How ridiculous is it to divide an island? The one geographical unit, that's homogenous. Anyway. So the bottom line of it, Jude, I don't think money should come into. Anyway, as well as that, Jude, myself and Paul Gosling and Colin McKenna, I mentioned this last week, we're involved in the project. Hubner, the German guy, said if everything was taken all into account, and I'm not going to go into the details, within a couple of years, Ireland could, based on the figures back at the time he was doing it, could be 35 billion in profit. There was all sorts of shakes and snails and snakes and ladders and things like that could be worked out. The thing the last day from the German guy and Fitzgerald, Jude, there's all sorts of holes in that argument. They're taking about so many things that, based on current things, and so much variables can change. Bottom line, Jude, I think they does everybody a favor by sort of saying, right, here's the worst case scenario. Now let's look at it.
I agree, and all these things are necessary. I'm talking about a broader point, and I'm wondering, are we not sort of mealy-mouthed? Are we not sort of, I don't know, letting ourselves down, where we say, how much is this going to cost? What? I'm going to have to pay an extra £2,000 a year? Well, not a chance. And yet, as I say, there were guys who fought a war of independence. There were guys who went out in 1916 who knew they weren't going to win. He knew they were probably certain they were going to be executed. And they were prepared to pay that price. And we all say, oh, without the great, isn't it wonderful? Let's have a march past the GPO every year so we can salute their memory. And then we say, oh, geez, you're asking me to pay an extra £1,000? Not a chance. Not a chance. There's something sort of ridiculous about that, I think. The other thing, what was the other point I wanted to make there? You think of something smart to say, and I'll think of it.
No, Varadkar said the cost shouldn't really come into it. That there's a lot more to unity than just money. And he said even a drop of 4% of GDP is that so an obstacle that can't be overcome? We're awash with money right now. If the northern state got its act together, a foreign direct investment came in, and these are all quite doable. That could change very quickly. If all the economies of scale were introduced, and so on, so on, so on. So Jude, the US and the EU and the UK, but if they all put their act together, unity could easily.
Of course we could. Here's a question: if it cost you, would you vote for it? Unity? Me
Yeah,
too.
absolutely.
Okay, aren't we really noble souls in a dark
Aren't
world?
we?
Our light is
And we're
shining
not
out.
going to die for it. We might lose a couple hundred quid.
That may be necessary
Okay,
too.
Jude. See you
Right,
Monday.
Pat. All the best.